Welcome to Chapter 11, Malicious Code and Activity. We'll describe how malicious attacks, threats, and vulnerabilities impact our IT infrastructure. The impact of malicious code and malware on systems and organizations, attackers, hackers, and social engineers, the phases of a computer attack, and tools and techniques to detect and prevent attacks. So, malicious software or malware is any program that carries out actions that you do not want or intend. Malicious code attacks all three information security properties, or our main security principles: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Characteristics, architecture, and operation of malicious software. Right, so the attacker can gain admin control and use commands to inflict harm or steal data or money. The attacker sends commands directly to a system, and the system interprets and executes them. And the attacker can use software programs that harm a system or that make the data unusable. Or one of the bigger things today is to encrypt your data and then blackmail you, or charge you money to get your data back. An attacker uses legitimate remote administration tools, or they can, and security probes to identify and exploit security vulnerabilities on a network. These are the different types of malware, right? So you can have viruses, spam, logic bombs, phishing, botnets, denial of service attacks, web page defacements. Some of these are severe, some of these are minor, like the web page defacements, or even hoax or myths. They get you to do things, and maybe delete a file that you're not supposed to delete because they say you're infected if you have it. Viruses, right? So they target computer hardware and software startup functionalities. They attack and modify executable programs such as .com, .exe, .sys, and DLL files in Microsoft Windows, among others. Data infectors, so they attack document files containing embedded microprogramming capabilities such as Office. But typically viruses, they require user action. The user has to do something in order to typically allow them access. But the virus can also wait until the user transmits the infected object to another computer, and then the user transmits it to an infected computer, and then the virus locates and infects suitable objects on the new computer, and then this cycle repeats. So you have the unaffected system, you got the applications OS, your ROM, your hardware, and then the infected system, the application's infected, it goes to the virus and then the OS. So it intercepts calls to the OS by the application, and then may infect files that pass through the OS as well. And then it's going to look for ways for you to transmit it to another host to infect them. Here's for a file. So unaffected exe has its typical headers, and then the actual original program code. But then the infected file, it has these jumps and pointers. So it in the header it has a jump to the virus code, runs the virus code, and then the virus code then has a pointer back to the original program, so it looks like everything's normal. Infected document attachment arrives in an email message. Maybe it's got a macro virus. You click on it, and it infects your .normal application in Word, and then it spreads to other documents in your internal document folder. So then we have different classifications of viruses. So polymorphic viruses, these include a separate encryption engine that stores the virus body in encrypted format while duplicating the main body of the virus. The virus exposes only the decryption routine for possible detection. It embeds the control portion of the virus in the decrypted routine, which seizes control of the target system and decrypts the main body of the virus so that it can be executed. And true polymorphic viruses use an additional mutation engine to vary the decryption process for each iteration. This makes it even more difficult to identify and detect and remove. Stealth viruses, also called armor viruses, these use a number of techniques to conceal themselves from users and from detection software, and they typically install a low-level system service function, and they can intercept any system request and alter the service output to conceal their presence. Stealth viruses can have size stealth, read stealth, or both, so they can hide their size or hide their code. Slow viruses, these counter the ability of antivirus programs to detect changes in infected files. The class of virus resides in the computer's memory, where antivirus software cannot detect it. It waits for certain tasks like copying or moving files to execute. As the operating system reads the file into memory, the virus alters it before writing to the output file, making it much harder to detect. Retroviruses, these attack countermeasures such as antivirus signatures or integrity databases. A retrovirus searches for these data files and deletes or alters them, thereby crippling the antivirus software's ability to function. Other viruses, especially boot viruses, which gain control of the target system startup. They modify Windows registry keys or other operating system key startup files to disable the antivirus, firewall, and intrusion detection systems if found. Cross-platform viruses, these are less prevalent but can still be potent threats. There have been a number of documented viruses that targeted multiple operating systems, Apple Macintosh, HyperCard viruses for instance. If those platforms also run Windows emulation software, they become as susceptible to Windows viruses as native Windows computers. Multi-part viruses, these are hybrid viruses that exhibit multiple behaviors. There are two main types of multi-part viruses: the master boot record, boot sector viruses, and the virus infecting viruses. Such viruses may exist as file infectors within an application, and upon execution of the infected application, the virus might spawn a master boot record infection, which then infects other files when you restart the system. And this is just how the stealth virus works. It just intercepts calls to the OS and may impact the file. And it's just going to try and hide itself. These are how a slow virus works in memory, and a retrovirus works by altering the antivirus intrusion detection software so they can't find it. And then the multi-part virus, it starts with the boot, then goes to the file, or vice versa. Rootkits, these are very dangerous. They're type of malware that modifies or replaces one or more existing programs to hide the fact that a computer has been compromised. And they modify parts of the operating system to conceal traces of their presence, and you can no longer trust your operating system. Provides attackers with access to compromised computers and easy access to launching additional attacks, and it is very difficult to detect and almost impossible to remove. Ransomware, right? These are the latest attempts to generate funds directly from a computer user. They attack a computer and limits the user's ability to access the data. They typically encrypt important files or even the entire disk, make them inaccessible, and then they demand ransomware, typically in cryptocurrency. And one of the first ransomware programs was CryptoLocker. spam. Consumes computing resources, bandwidth, and CPU time, and wastes a lot of people's time with emails. It diverts IT personnel from activities more critical. It's a potential carrier of malicious code, and it compromises intermediate systems to facilitate remailing services. And opt-out, unsubscribe features and spam messages can represent a new form of reconnaissance attack to acquire legitimate target addresses. It just proves that, yes, you are a legitimate email address, and please send more. Worms, designed to propagate from one host machine to another using the host's own network communication protocols, but unlike viruses, do not require a host program to survive and replicate, and you don't need action from the user either. The term worm stems from the fact that the worms are programs with segments working on different computers, all communicating all over the network. So here's a worm infects a host, searches the system for email addresses. Worm then sends itself to other targets using SMTP or host's own email system, or maybe it just scans the network for open ports and compromising systems, and then it propagates that way. It infects itself on compromised systems, but it hops from one to one, but it continues until a worm triggering condition expires or until security patches are implemented to prevent it from propagating. Trojan horses, the largest class of malware, and it's any program that masquerades as a useful program while hiding its malicious intent. This is why you should never really download anything from a site you don't trust. Especially like if you're trying to find and watch a free movie of something that's just recently released, and a lot of times these are Trojan horses that you can, it's a movie viewer and you can watch the movie, but what else did you just download and install? It relies on social engineering to spread and operate, and it spreads through email messages, website downloads, social networking sites, and automated distribution agents or bots. Logic bombs. These are programs that execute a malicious function of some kind when they detect a certain condition, such as they hit a certain date, then all of a sudden it launches, or the user does something, goes opens up the bank web page, and then it kicks off. And typically originate with organizations' insiders, because people inside an organization generally have more detailed knowledge of the IT infrastructure than other outsiders. So this could be like a disgruntled employee, that they know they're going to be laid off, or they're going to leave, and then they set it for 90 days after they're gone to do some damage. Active content vulnerabilities. So active content refers to dynamic objects that do something when the user opens a web page. These can be like ActiveX, JavaScript, VB scripts, macros, and other scripting languages. It has potential weaknesses that malware can exploit. So all these are typically very exploitable. So active content threats are considered mobile code because these programs run on a wide variety of computer platforms, and then users download bits of these mobile code, and then it gains access to the hard disk and does things like fill up the desktop with infested file icons, changes your search parameters, your home page, things like that. Malicious add-ons. Add-ons are companion programs that extend web browsers and can decrease security. So malicious add-ons are browser add-ons that contain some type of malware that, once installed, perform malicious actions, and only install browser add-ons from sources you trust. Cross-site scripting. SQL injection, LDAP injection, XML injection, command injection. These are all injection type attacks. Injection occurs when malicious software provides deliberately invalid input to some other software. And so cross-site scripting is a technique that allows attackers to embed client-side scripts into web pages that users view. When the user views a web page with the script, the web browser runs the attacking script, and these scripts can then be used to bypass access controls, and effects can pose substantial security risk depending on how sensitive the data are on the vulnerable website. For example, like your banking website. SQL injection is a code injection used to attack applications that depend on relational databases that use SQL. SQL statements are inserted into an input field and are executed by the application. It's a poorly written application if it allows SQL injection. And SQL injection attacks allows attackers to disclose and modify data, violate data integrity, or even destroy data or manipulate the data. LDAP injection exploits websites that construct LDAP based or on user input. Web applications that don't sanitize their input enable attackers to alter the way the LDAP statements are constructed, and the LDAP statements that are modified by an attacker run with the same permissions as the component that executed the command. So just like SQL injection, it's taking advantage of poorly written applications. XML injection is a technique to manipulate the logic of an XML application or service, and injecting XML content into an XML message can alter the logic of an application or even insert malicious content into the XML document. And once again, just poorly written applications. Command injection. The goal of this type of attack is to execute commands on a host operating system. A vulnerable application provides the ability for this attack to succeed, and these attacks are possible only when an application accepts unvalidated user input and passes the input to a system shell. And you could basically say almost all these are susceptible to non-validating of the user input, which is one of the biggest issues with application development, and it's a known issue that will resolve a lot of attacks and security flaws, but a lot of user validation and input validation is not very well taught to our developers. Botnets, robotically controlled networks. Attackers infect vulnerable machines, and then they install their agents, and then the agents perform various functions at the commands of the bot herder or the controller. And the controllers communicate with other members of the botnet using the internet relay chat channels, and attackers can use botnets to distribute malware, spam, and other attacks such as DOS attacks against organizations or even countries. And denial of service is just overwhelming a server or network to a point that they can't be used for legitimate uses. And typically it can crash a server or network, and then a distributed denial of attack just uses many hosts, intermediary hosts to conduct the attack, like their botnet, to do a distributed attack instead of just one machine attacking. You can get thousands of machines attacking. Here's a send flood, which is one of the forms of attack. The attacker uses an IP spoof to send a large number of packets requesting connections to the victim computer, and it overwhelms the computer. Smurf attack is attacker directs forged ICMP echo request packets to an IP broadcast address from remote locations to generate a distributed or a denial of service attack. So typically what will happen is they will flood and ping all these other agents, and then it'll send all of the information to the victim in response, because the victim is addressed as a response. So you send the response to the victim, and the victim gets overwhelmed. Any solicited spyware, any unsolicited background process that installs itself on a user computer and collects information about the user's browsing habits and website activities. It'll definitely affect your privacy and your confidentiality. Spyware cookies are cookies that share information across sites, and some cookies are persistent and are stored on a hard drive indefinitely without the user's permission. Adware triggers nuisance such as pop-up ads and banners when visitors visit certain websites. It affects productivity and may combine with active background activities, and collects and tracks information about application, website, and internet activity and use. Phishing tricks users into providing login information on what appears to be a legitimate website, but is actually a website set up by an attacker to obtain the information. Spear phishing is an attacker supplies information about a victim that appears to come from a legitimate company that they use. And farming, the use of social engineering to obtain access credentials such as usernames and passwords. Keystroke loggers, they capture keystrokes of whatever the user enters and forwards that information to the attacker, or they come and collect the keystroke, because it could be something that gets plugged in, like a USB, and collects all the keystrokes, and they come and pick it up, or it could to where it sends them the information. Enables the attacker to capture login information, banking information, passwords, and other sensitive information. All right, guidelines for recognizing hoaxes. Inspect any validation certificates, or at least the source information, the URL of the advisory. Where did it come from? Do you trust them? Is it legitimate? Is there a request to forward the alert to others? No legitimate security alert will suggest that the recipient forward the advisory. Are there detailed explanations or technical terminology in the alert? Hoaxes often use techno-babble to intimidate the recipient into believing the alert is legitimate. A legitimate advisory typically omits any details. However, it simply refers the recipient to a legitimate website for details. The website also typically provides a suggestion for protection activities. And then, does the alert follow the generic format of a chain letter? If in this format there is a hook, a threat, and a request. The hook is a catchy or dramatic opening or subject line to catch the recipient's attention. The threat is the technical sounding warnings of serious vulnerabilities or damage. And the request is a plea to distribute the alert or suggestion to take some immediate action, for example, to download a patch from a linked website. So be careful. There are a lot of hoaxes out there. Homepage hijacking. So exploiting of browser vulnerabilities to reset the homepage. Many types of active content can change the browser's homepage, often without the user's permission, even without resorting to covert means. It is easy to inconvenience the user and to select the action that does more than he or she expects. Just because you click a button that says remove infected programs from my computer does not mean that's the action that will occur. And covertly installing a browser helper object Trojan program. This Trojan program contains the hijacking code. Once a browser helper object execute, it can change the browser's homepage back to the hijacker's desired site, and typically the hijacker programs put a reference to themselves into the operating system startup procedures. That way the hijacker runs every time the computer reboots. If you try to change any of these settings, the hijacker repeatedly changes them back until you find and remove the hijacking software. Web page defacement is just someone gaining unauthorized access to a web server and altering the web page of the site on the server. The attacker replaces the original pages on the site with altered versions, or they deface the original version. Brief history of malicious code threats, right? So we had, 70s and 80s, and in the 80s we had the early PC viruses, 90s we had early LAN viruses, 90s we have smart applications and the internet, and then now to present we've got all kinds of things, including ransomware. That seems to be a big one now. Threats to businesses, right? Attacks against confidentiality and privacy, attacks against data integrity, attacks against availability, attacks against productivity and performance, and attacks to create legal liability, right? And unaddressed vulnerabilities can extend beyond the legal boundaries of an organization, creating a potential liability to customers, trading partners, and others. And finally, attacks that damage our reputation, our company's reputation. Internal threats from employees, unsafe computing practices, so exchanging of untrusted disk or media, thumb drives, things like that among systems, installation of unauthorized, unregistered software, unmonitored download of files from the internet, uncontrolled dissemination of email or other messaging application attachments. Anatomy of an attack, right? You got the attacker motives, the purpose of the attack, what is their goals, the type of attack they're using, and then the different phases of attack. Here are some of the motives, right? It could be money, it could be fame, it could be political beliefs or systems, or plain out revenge. Purpose of the attack, right? You're going to deny availability, you're going to do a denial of service, or you're going to do some data modification, or are you going to extract and grab some data, or you're looking to compromise that other system and using this system as a launch point. Types of attack: you have unstructured attacks, structured attacks, direct attacks, and indirect attacks. Right, so direct attacks, that is the system that it's directed at. Indirect, you're using that system as a launching point to get to another system. Right, and here's a direct attack. Right, so you're coming in from there, from the internet, going to the network, and going right to the web server. Phases of attack: you're going to reconnaissance and probe and plan. Then you're going to gain access. Then once you've got access, you got to try to maintain access and then cover your tracks. So reconnaissance and probing, right? You're using anything and everything to collect information and to conduct the attack. You might use tools within the protocol, TCP protocol suite, and other standardized, customized, simple network management protocol tools, port scanners, port mappers, security probes. There's a plethora of tools. If you're interested in some of them, you can look at the Kali Linux distribution. It has a ton of different tools that hackers use. Access and privilege escalation. Establish the initial connection to a target host, typically a server, and then gain administrative rights onto the system. It's a process of escalating. Covering traces of the attack, remove any traces of the attack, so you're going to remove any files you may have created and restore as many files to their pre-attack condition as possible. Remove log file entries that may provide evidence of the attack. Attack prevention tools and techniques using defense in depth, right? Practice of layering defenses into zones to increase the overall protection level and provide more reaction time to respond to incidents. So you have application defense methods, operating system defense mechanisms, and then network infrastructure defense mechanisms and tools. Application defenses: implement regular antivirus screening on all hosts. You ensure the virus definition files are up to date. Require scanning of all removable media, or maybe don't even allow removable media. Installing personal firewall and IDS softwares on hosts as well as the network. Deploying change detection software and integrity checking software. Maintaining logs and implementing, and then going through the logs, searching through the logs, monitoring the logs, implementing email usage controls, ensuring that email attachments are scanned. Operating system defenses, deploying change detection, integrity checking software, and maintain logs to ensure your OS isn't changed without your knowledge. Deploying or enabling change detection and integrity checking software on all servers. Ensuring that operating systems are consistent and have been patched with the latest updates from vendors as soon as possible. Ensuring that only trusted sources are used when installing and upgrading OS code. and disabling unnecessary OS services and processes that may pose a security vulnerability. So turn off all your services that you're not using on a server or device. Network infrastructure defense. Create checkpoints in the network. Use proxy services and bastion hosts to protect critical services. Bastion hosts are just mainly stuff in your DMZ. They're segmented off in a non-trusted zone, and then they're hardened. They only have if it's an email server, it only does email. If it's a web server, it only does web. But they're hardened servers. Goes back to disabling any services and processes you don't need. Using content filtering at choke points to screen traffic, ensure that only trusted sources are used. Disable any unnecessary network services and processes, once again, because there's security vulnerabilities that are found in these services and processes. And if you don't need them, don't have them running. It's just like creating more doors into your network. Maintaining up-to-date IDS, intrusion detection system signature databases. Apply security patches to network devices to ensure protection. Safe recovery techniques and practices. Store OS and data file backup images on external media to ease recovering from potential malware infections. Scan new and replacement media for malware before reinstalling software. Disable network access to systems during restore procedures or upgrades until you have re-enabled or installed protection software or services. Implementing effective software best practices. Adopt an acceptable use policy for network services and resources. Adopt standardized software to better control patches and upgrades to ensure that you address vulnerabilities. And consider implementing an ISO 27002 compliant security policy. Incident detection tools and techniques. You have antivirus scanning software, network monitors and analyzers, context filtering and logging software, and honeypots and honey nets are decoys. You set stuff up and make them look vulnerable, and they're actually not used. And then if anybody uses them or accesses them, you know that somebody's on your network trying to do nefarious things. And so they're just kind of they're just out there enticing people to try to get into them. And so you know that somebody's out there trying to do something if they get accessed. That is our chapter 11. I will see you in chapter 12.